US media, Israel sells US dollars in exchange for RMB, 53 countries begin to de-dollarize. The US financial website Zero Hedge reported on April 23 that there has been new progress in global de-dollarization. The US media quoted Bloomberg News on April 22, saying, "The Bank of Israel made the biggest adjustment to its reserve allocation in more than a decade, adding the yuan and 3 other currencies to its reserves that exceeded $200 billion for the first time last year. It got people's attention." According to US media, starting this year, the Bank of Israel's foreign exchange reserves have expanded from the 3 of the US dollar, the euro and the British pound to include the Canadian and Australian dollars, as well as the Japanese yen and the Chinese yuan. The increases mark a change in the Bank of Israel's overall investment guidelines and philosophy, Andrew Abi, deputy governor of the Bank of Israel, said in an interview. It is reported that in Israel's foreign exchange reserves, the British pound and the yen will account for 5%, and the currencies of Canada and Australia will each account for 3.5%. Under the new approach, the renminbi's share in 2022 was set at 2%, according to the Bank of Israel's annual report late last month. To accommodate these changes, the euro share will drop from just over 30% to 20%. This is the lowest level in at least a decade. The dollar's share will drop from 66.5% to 61%. Abi said a dramatic increase in Israel's foreign exchange reserves led the central bank to extend the investment horizon. "We look at the need for returns from reserves to cover the cost of liability." In other words, Israel is reducing its exposure to the dollar and euro to increase its exposure to the yuan. Israel appears to be catching up with meaningful changes in the global currency landscape. As for Israel's de-dollarization approach, Zero Hedge further said that he hopes other countries will follow suit. Another more unexpected new development is that, based on the news of Reuters and Bloomberg, a document released by the British Treasury on April 22 shows that the United Kingdom has authorized Gazprom Bank and its subsidiaries to pay Russia by the end of May. Natural gas payments. Earlier, Russia proposed that natural gas buyers from various countries open accounts in the bank and pay for natural gas in rubles. According to media reports, the United Kingdom has approved the settlement of Russian gas in rubles by the end of May. Not only that, the US economy continues to monetize huge amounts of US debt. As shown in the figure below, as of April 23, the total US federal debt reached a record high of $30.4 trillion, or 125% of its GDP. And in the process of transferring the risk of the US deficit to the global economy and opening financial restrictions at every turn, the process of global de-dollarization has become almost white-hot. Among them, the US debt is very obvious. In another new development, Goldman Sachs said in its latest report that overseas investor demand for US Treasuries plummeted just as the Fed launched QT. The Fed is just days away from starting to shrink its massive $9 trillion balance sheet, and as global interest rates recalibrate around the world, concerns are growing that the Fed is so far behind the curve that yields will pick up in inflation. Soaring higher before control, the problem arises. Investors are increasingly concerned about the risk of US Treasury supply and demand imbalances, Goldman Sachs analyst Avisha Toka mentioned on April 22, the sharp reduction in negative yielding debt, US Treasuries relative to domestic alternatives. The weakening economic attractiveness of commodities and the de-dollarization efforts by official agencies should see foreign buyer demand for US Treasuries weaken in the coming quarters. US bond yields and US bond popularity are inversely proportional. According to the latest data of the latest International Capital Flow Report (TIC) released by the US Treasury on April 16, the report data was delayed by 2 months, and the official institutions holding US debt overseas sold a net $16.2 billion in February this year. US Treasuries. Taking oil country Saudi Arabia as an example, the latest data shows that Saudi Arabia reduced its holdings of US Treasuries by $2.7 billion in February this year, and currently holds $116.7 billion. Since February last year, Saudi Arabia has begun to reduce its holdings by a total of $16.2 billion from the previous $132.9 billion, with a total reduction ratio of more than 12%. And one of the logic behind this is precisely under the impact of inflation data of more than 5% in the United States for 11 consecutive months. In particular, the latest data released by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics on April 12 showed that the U.S. Consumer Price Index, CPI, in March, data rose 8.5% year-on-year, up from 7.9% in February, as the U.S. reported its highest consumer price data since 1981. The risk of default in the U.S. bond market has increased, and U.S. debt has continued to lose its appeal. All indicators of U.S. inflation are at historical extremes. Energy currency experts also believe that Saudi Arabia, as one of the main initiators of petrodollars, has continuously sold US bonds on a large scale, which may pose a shock to whether the US dollar can maintain its position as the king of commodity trading currencies in the future. Obviously, the Saudi economy is starting the process of de-US debt and dollarization. It is worth mentioning that the two oil countries, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, began to adopt the form of digital currency in bilateral commodity transactions as early as a year ago to avoid the risks brought by US dollar settlement. In the context of the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, due to the various financial restrictions imposed by the US dollar on Russia, India, as Russia's main energy buyer, some media reported at the end of March that India and Russia are working hard to establish a kind of bilateral trade. New trading mechanism that will allow settlement in local currency, rubles and rupees. According to the report, Russia and India may choose to use Russia's Financial Information Transmission System, SPFS, for bilateral trade, which is similar to SWIFT. Up to now, the process of global de-dollarization has been accelerating. The specific methods also include increasing non-dollar foreign exchange reserves, such as increasing non-dollar currencies such as gold and RMB, to US debt, such as reducing US debt holdings in different months, developing sovereign encrypted currency, many countries are already doing it, signed a wide range of local currency swap agreements, such as the swap agreement between RMB and non-US dollar currencies, and traded commodities such as oil with non-US dollar currencies. Up to now, China, Germany and other 19 Eurozone countries, the United Kingdom, Japan, Russia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Iran, Angola, Venezuela, Iraq, Kuwait, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, Turkey, Qatar, at least 52 countries including the United Arab Emirates, India, Vietnam, Hungary, Brazil, South Africa, Romania, Sweden, Singapore, Canada, Switzerland, Saudi Arabia, Cuba, and Nigeria have begun to use different methods to start the process of de-dollarization. The aforementioned Israel is using the method of reducing dollar reserves to become the 53rd country to de-dollarize. Taking 3 countries in Southeast Asia as an example, Bank Negara Malaysia proposed a few weeks ago to implement a pan-Asian gold-backed currency among Southeast Asian countries, because gold is more stable relative to the US dollar. As early as 4 years ago, the central banks of Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand have launched the direct settlement plan for local currency transactions to reduce the dependence of the financial systems of the 3 countries on the US dollar. Agus, the former governor of Indonesia's central bank, said, currently, 94% of Indonesia's export business and 78% of its import business are settled in US dollars. The above plan will help the 3 countries to diversify their international financial business settlement currencies. In the operation of the US dollar to shear the wool of the world economy, the initiator of the Asian financial crisis in 1997 is also considered to be closely related to it. Therefore, many countries in Southeast Asia have been lingering fears about the US dollar for more than 20 years. This has also become the main reason for the de-dollarization of 3 Southeast Asian countries, namely Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand. Billionaire Jim Rogers said a few days ago that the tradition of the dollar's reserve status has changed. They were considered the most reliable currencies for centuries, but have since been replaced. This also seems to be the result of the vicissitudes of the world economy and trade.